All right, good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started on the breakout session. Thank you so much for joining us for You Have a Friend in Me, Creating Safety and Belonging for LGBTQI plus refugees. I'm delighted to have Misha Smith here to make this presentation for us. Before we get started, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items. Just as an FYI, all participants are muted to eliminate background noise. This is a live presentation, so please bear with us if there are any technical difficulties. That I'm going to be monitoring the chat for questions. Please just put your chat throughout the presentation, and I will ask at the end. I will serve as moderator for those questions to Misha Smith. This session is going to be recorded, so if you would like to access it later, it will be posted on our website. And please don't forget to engage with us on social media at MoDude. And having said that, I am delighted to introduce Misha Smith to give our presentation, and I will hand the baton.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. And so I will start it off with just my introduction. I am a white, non-binary, queer person. I live in Missouri. My pronouns are they, them. I am also the Missouri Resettlement Activities Coordinator with Missouri Office of Refugee Administration. I am also a graduate student at Park University, and I'm in the last few weeks of finishing my public administration degree. I say that so that you guys know that I am part of the LGBTQI population. I work in refugee resettlement, and I am also a student of higher education. With all of that said, my experiences are not the same as those that are refugees who have come over here and are also identifying as LGBTQI plus, and why that matters. So these are some definitions. Just to start it off, just because sometimes, specifically with refugees and migrants and immigrants, asylum seekers, we tend to lump them all together, and they're very much not. And so you guys can look this over. I'm also included a link where you can look up more specific definitions. I also want to go over gender identity as well as gender expression. So for me personally, my gender identity is non-binary. My gender expression to most people who see me is very feminine. Those two things can exist together. And it's also important for people to realize that we tend to make assumptions when we see people, and we may say things or do things that can be harmful. And that's why it's important to let people tell us who they are, and then just respect that. Sexual orientation is also a really good term, because a lot of times you hear people say preference, and it is not a preference, because that goes back to the harmful language of believing that who people identify as far as their sexual orientation is a choice, and it is not. So the overview, as I said, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex refugees, they face unique challenges that are due to their gender identity and sexual orientation. Those that flee to America because of persecution, they often are fleeing with a lot of trauma, and then they come here and they deal with even more trauma. And so it is really important to understand that our interactions with them to be intentional, not to add to that trauma. And because some of those unique challenges, they can relate to their documentation, changing a gender marker on their documentation, as well as family-based cases, because the legal system can have its own discrimination against refugees and refugees who identify as LGBTQIA. So we know that in Missouri, 2022, we saw a record number of anti-LGBTQI bills, and this happened across the United States, and many of them were aimed at students. Missouri introduced 17 bills that, even though they did not pass because there were other things they were focusing on, and so Governor Parson said they ran out of time, these are still priorities. And so we need to be very mindful of following the 2023 legislative session when it starts, because some of these bills do impact students at schools. And though a lot of them are related to early education and secondary education, students who may be in high school that are going to be going into colleges, university, trade schools, they're going to carry that trauma with them, and that may impact how they want to be seen, how they come out, how they want to interact with any resources at the university for LGBTQI students. And so we're going to do a little bit of Refugee 101 real quick. So as I said, a lot of times we get refugee, we get migrants, we get asylum seekers. All of those terms, people kind of lump them all into one. But a refugee is someone outside of their home country with a well-founded fear of returning home. This can be due to armed conflict, generalized violence, and then persecution based on different areas such as race, religion, nationality, their political opinion, or membership of a political or a particular social group. This can include people who are LGBTQI plus. The decision of whether someone is a refugee is decided by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And then the additional terms can be found on the MOORA website, and I've included all these links at the end of the slide. And then it's also important to realize that, as I said, when they are fleeing their country, and it is based on their social group as someone that identifies as LGBTQI, when they come into the States, that can also cause them additional discrimination and fear, and it can actually be something they're asked to prove, which can create even more hurdles for them. And a lot of times we saw this specifically this past year with Afghans who were evacuated very quickly. They often leave with only what they can carry, and they aren't able to have a lot of notice before they leave. Family members become separated. And a lot of times I don't think we really think about how they are leaving behind homes, their valuable items, education, and professional licenses. And then they flee to neighboring countries to seek safety. In the case of with Afghans, they didn't have like a long time to really get prepared. This was immediate, which is very traumatizing. And these are the numbers of Missouri arrival numbers from 2016 to 2022. In 2022, we saw 3,830. And we know, if you watch the news, we had the end of the war in Afghanistan, the Taliban took over. So we had quick evacuations, as well as the war in Ukraine. And then the gap from about the decrease in numbers between 2017 to 2021 was just due to the fact that not every administration fully funds these programs, and so not as many people can get entry into the United States. This is a process that it takes for a refugee to, before they even come into the United States, to be considered a refugee and gain admission. The process typically takes 18 to 24 months. Most of this is done, they may be in their home country, they're fleeing violence, they go into another country, they're there for 18 to 24 months going through this entire process, all of these steps, before they are even approved to come into the United States. And then once they come into the United States, they go through the resettlement process, which is getting settled into housing, getting settled with benefits, finding work, acclimating, getting into schools, and finding community. And then the LGBTQI plus refugee. As of 2019, 70 countries, they criminalize the consensual same-sex acts. And I like to really focus on consensual These are people who are consensually having sexual relations with each other, who are facing criminalization. And out of those 70 countries, 11 have the death penalty as a punishment for people having sex that is not heteronormative. LGBTQI asylum seekers fleeing persecution in their home country, they face similar or even higher risk in countries where they resettle. And it can come from nationals, it can come from the government, it can come from Homeland Security. I was going to pull up the tweet, but it wasn't working earlier, so I apologize. But the tweet was Homeland Security doing a big post on Pride. And further down were instances of people with Homeland Security enacting harm on people who arrived at the border, who were members of the LGBTQI plus community. And transgender women tend to face the highest risk. The risk can be increased due to xenophobia. And so it is that intersectionality that they are facing discrimination because they are refugees, and then they are also facing discrimination because they are LGBTQI plus. And it is important to realize they're not just one or the other. They're facing discrimination and risk of harm, sometimes because of both. Socioeconomic marginalization. So as I mentioned earlier, they leave so quickly that they're not able to bring anything with them. But many of them, they're leaving careers, they're leaving their employment, they may have been business owners, advanced degrees. And when they come here, they're basically thrown into poverty. And so that can also cause marginalization. They are isolated from support networks because there is separation. And when they first get here, they may not have come with friends or family. And so they are alone. And then there's the emotional distress, which I think that just speaks for itself. Because if you can imagine, you wake up one day and you have to leave everything you know. And then you arrive somewhere else and you are completely alone. And you also don't know if you are safe. And then also, as I mentioned, there can be discrimination against refugees seeking asylum, because if they state they are seeking asylum because they fear going home because of their sexual orientation, they then have to prove that. And some of the issues can be, they may have never had a same-sex relationship. They may not be able to attest that they've had partners of the same gender, or anything outside of the heteronormative ideal that we have for people. And then in Missouri, as of January 2021, 7 municipalities in Missouri protect people from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So this is it, just 7. And that's problematic because we already know, we've heard the stories of people losing jobs or not being able to use their pronouns or use the bathroom that identifies with their gender. And that just causes a lot of feelings of not feeling safe. And this is also where we stand in Missouri. This is from, it's called MAP, and the resources and the links for this are also at the end of the presentation. But this is our scorecard, and we get a -1 out of 10. And so where we're at is why we have people fighting to change these laws and to create laws and policies that make Missouri safer. While we're waiting for that, we can also we can create a community and systems that create the safety for LGBTQI plus refugees. So we got that. And then here, this is mapping LGBTQ equality 2010 to 2020. We see that so the red is is basically negative. They have laws, and the equality is basically non-existent. The orange is very low, light green is kind of medium, and the green is a very, there is a lot of equality present in that state. And as you see, Missouri, we went from basically like negative to low, which is still not great. And the colors on the maps, it really hasn't changed enough that we can say that there is equality. So the ORR, or the Office of Refugee Resettlement, that is the federal group as part of Homeland Security. They propose and implement national policy for refugee resettlement programs. They work to navigate growing and challenging mandates of programs that serve many of the diverse communities. They work with partners such as Missouri Office of Refugee Administration to identify emerging issues. They draft regulations, policies, and guidance, and they respond to legislative, policy, and congressional inquiries. And so in July of 2022, ORR issued their statement that replaced an older one, and this one is more comprehensive, where they're stating that they consider equality for all expressions of gender, gender identities, and sexual orientations a critical aspect of benefit and service provision for ORR eligible populations. And so this is the policy that the agencies that serve refugees and receive funding for the programs that we have to follow. There we go. And so that when we enroll them in programs, we also we address their needs as LGBTQI plus individuals, and that the documentation that we use will is changed to make sure that anyone that we're not just being heteronormative, that we are providing a space and ability for people to identify for who they are, and gender affirming environments, that there's appropriate service delivery, and that LGBTQI plus refugees feel safe to come out and to let people know who they are. And then also there could be waivers requested for services. So let's say there is a couple and they are a same-sex couple, and this allows them to be able to get housing together instead of saying that they can't if the housing or the service is specific for what usually would be considered a heteronormative family. And so now we're at the part about creating safe spaces. And when I started this, you know, as a white femme passing person, I looked at this like, yeah, they come out and we have the groups and we invite them and everything's great. They're going to be at college. It's a place of safety. I think that's the problem of what we do sometimes. We tend to view safety for people who don't have the same experiences as us through the lens of what we considered safe. And so while these spaces and these groups and these clubs and these activities on campus can be places of safety, and we know they are, but they're not always for everyone. For refugees, if someone from their community saw them entering into a club, an event, or carrying a flyer that in any way outed them, that can lead to their family pulling off financial support. It can cause harm to the family because they may still have family back home. And if someone found out that their child identified as LGBTQI plus, that could cause people to say, we are no longer supporting your family's business. It can cause them to be shunned. So it can also cause harm to their family. And then it can also cause physical harm to the student. Family members could hurt them, people in the community. And so we really have to look at safety on a very broad spectrum, that it doesn't just mean one thing. And as I mentioned, if a student comes to the campus and is trying to find community and a place where they can come out and meet other people in the community, but then they're given a flyer and it has the rainbows and the flags, and someone else saw that, that can be very harmful to them. And that can also, because of fear of harm, cause them to not seek out those places. And so that leads to isolation. Plus, it also is important to say, not everyone wants to come out. I came out later in life, and not everyone who knows who they are wants to come out publicly. They may have just a few friends who know, and that's enough for them. And I think it's important that those who are their friends, are their community, who know and support them and love them, don't speak for them, don't out them, don't correct their pronouns. Let them lead that, because they know what safety looks like for them. And this is a statement from a student. And I think I'll just give you guys a minute, but I think it's important, and this one really spoke to me, because it does say that there are students that are not going to walk into these rooms that are very, very clear that the spaces are for the LGBTQI students. And they're not going to come in there and go, hey, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, my pronouns are they, them, I'm a trans woman, I'm a trans man. They're just not going to do that because of that fear of being outed. But they still deserve to have the options to find support and find resources in a way that is comfortable for them. And so creating inclusive and supportive spaces, there's not a lot of data. So as you notice, this presentation is not full of data because there's not a lot. And the reasons are, as I mentioned before, people who are coming into America from other countries are not then taking all these surveys and outing themselves. And as we mentioned, that comes from a lot of places of trauma, from their home country to their experience of coming into America, their experience once they're here, and maybe with their family or within the schools, because a lot of times people view the time that we go to university as, this is amazing, I get to be whoever I want, I'm an adult. But it's really not that way, because the students who maybe were homophobic or transphobic in elementary school and high school, they go to college. The people who attended university become teachers, they become professors, they become people that work on the campuses. And so we know that that discrimination exists. And so some of the ways that I found that can be a good way to get data and get feedback on what these inclusive and supportive spaces look like: QR codes, online surveys, one-on-one interviews, ways that people can provide data and feedback and speak to their own experience and their own needs without outing themselves. And then it's also saying you can create spaces that are welcoming without it being full of rainbows and flags and just very overtly queer, is what I say. That you can still have these spaces while people, as they're going in and out of those spaces or attending the events, they can maintain their level of comfort with what coming out looks like. Because as I said, I think it's very important to realize just the amount of risk that it can be for someone to come out. In the beginning, I kind of gave you my little spill of who I am. I have times where I am very careful about what I wear. I don't always correct someone if they misgender me, but I don't worry that me coming out is going to bring harm to my family. I don't worry that the government is going to say that I'm going to be put to death. So for me coming out, there's still a lot of privilege there, because I can also choose to not come out. I can go into a space and be seen as a white female. People can assume that I am straight. And if I want to maintain safety, I can do that. And so it's very important that I'm not the one deciding what these spaces look like for refugees, for migrants, for people coming from other countries, because what is safe for me can be very harmful to them. Something that I really like to say is good intentions can still cause harm. And then, but the thing is, evidence does show that LGBTQI plus refugees and immigrants, they find value when they are able to be in the spaces, but where they can discuss being their experience as someone who is LGBTQI plus and their experience being a migrant or a refugee. And so they don't want it to just be one or the other. They don't want to just go to a club for refugee students or LGBTQI students. And so I think it's important to ask, are refugee and migrant students in positions of leadership, or are they tokenized for events? Do you at the last minute ask them to be on a panel, be in a picture, be a prop? We can't do that because their experience and their experience is needed. If we are truly going to say that we are inclusive, that we are supportive, that we welcome refugees, we need to make sure that our spaces are saying we also welcome refugees who are LGBTQI plus, and that we are going to take their voices and their experience and let it lead the way to what some of these spaces look like for them. And then also the community connections. Are you connected with a multitude of community groups? Do the people in these groups look like the people who are coming into your spaces? Do they look like the people who want to come in their spaces, but they don't feel seen or heard? And then for me, my next steps for the Missouri Office of Refugee Administration is that we do want Missouri to be a safe and welcoming state for LGBTQI refugees. And that is in spite of laws and policies that are in place now or that are expected to be passed in 2023, because from the federal level to the state level, the local level, the trend has been problematic. So I'll be kicking off a statewide initiative in 2023 on having those conversations on what it looks like to be safe and inclusive for LGBTQI refugees. And the important thing to say is, while I am working, those are resources. While I am working to kick off this initiative, my goal is that I am not the face of it or considered the expert. Just facilitate it, but start taking the steps to understand how to put refugees who are LGBTQI plus, who are out, who do feel safe, how do we get them to leading these initiatives? Because that's probably going to create a lot more safety for their community than me. So we can't do this alone. And if you want to learn more, be involved, you can reach out to me at my email. And one other thing I want to add is last week I went to an event that had a panel discussion. It had people, it had a student who was finishing university and she was here. She had DACA, she was a dreamer. And then it had teachers and administrators. And one of them said that they went into a classroom and the teacher, who really wanted a new student to feel included and seen and not like left out, said, "Hey, do you want to tell us what it's like to be an undocumented student?" The student froze in fear, because that's a case where good intentions can still cause harm. Because one, there was no conversation beforehand if the student felt safe having this conversation. They weren't asked, they were just put on the spot. And a lot of times I think we need to be mindful of that. And so, like ORR said, they are wanting to, or our documentation has to be updated. And I know as a college student, most of my classes, they're like, hey, here, do your introduction, put whatever you want. Allow the student to tell you what they are okay being discussed. And the teacher may be the only one know that the student is non-binary or the student is a lesbian, but that is not consent to bring it up as a discussion and having that student put on the spot to be the speaker, the spokesperson for that entire community. Consent is important, getting their voice is important, and doing that. So I think I'm done a little bit earlier than I expected. Yeah, a little bit. Sorry. I sometimes talk a lot, but these are some really good resources. Rainbow Railroad is big on getting people in other countries who are facing serious harm because of their being LGBTQI plus into safe countries. St. Louis has a queer support helpline. Promo is a Missouri group who works to advance equality for LGBTQI plus people. Missouri Office of Refugee Administration, our website, you can get a lot of data and information on what the numbers look like, who we serve, and what we do. Switchboard is amazing. You can get technical assistance if you're wanting to know if what you're doing on campus in groups is right. And then the Human Rights Campaign. So, like I said, I'm done a little early, but that opens up time for questions if anyone has any.
Yes, thank you so much for this information. And if anyone has a question or a comment, or please leave it in the chat and I will convey it. But to get us started, I had a question. And
Yes.
the numbers you shared about Missouri were surprising to me. And I guess from the news, I'm more aware of both migrants and refugees at the border states. Is there a typical path of how someone gets to Missouri, or are there certain groups that are working to settle people here? Can you talk a little bit about how someone might find themselves in Missouri?
Sometimes they choose that because of employment. They may already have friends or family here. Um, and so, yeah, it can be that. And I'm still, yeah, they just basically go, I think, where they may prefer. Because a lot of times, because so many such large groups came in the past year, they may have already had their community or friends or family. They may have already had people here who say, hey, there's great jobs, there's housing, there's resources. And so they choose to come here. For Afghans specifically, because I know I shared like the 14 steps that take 18 to 24 months. For Afghans, once they came into the United States, which was very, very quick, normally it didn't take 18 to 24 months, as we know. They typically go to a military base first, and there they're processed. They're given a brief, some cultural orientation. They have like their medical checks and everything. And then down at the border, let's say someone's coming from Mexico or someone's coming from Cuba, someone a Cuban or a Haitian. Typically, like if they're coming in, they have to be refugee status is typically assigned once they're in another country before they come in. But yeah, I think the states, it's more, it's just based on preference. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, okay. If there aren't any,
Oh,
oh,
I do have a question about getting a copy of the presentation. And I will say, um, this is recorded, and if we can also make the actual slides
mhm.
available.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send that over.
And here's another question. What are some local organizations that serve refugees that folks can reach out to learn more about refugee resettlement?
So in Kansas City, we have Jewish Vocational Services, JVS. We have Delalam. Um, we have a group called Refuge KC. We have down St. Louis has International Institute of St. Louis. Columbia has Catholic Charities. Joplin and Springfield, we have RAISE and the International Institute of Southwest Missouri. Those are some of the groups that provide resettlement services. And then I know in Kansas City, we have, think if I get this wrong, I apologize, my coworkers here, but she can correct me. But we have the Welcoming KC, and which is people from many different organizations and backgrounds coming together to make Kansas City welcoming for refugees among a lot of different pillars. And then you can also go to the Maora website where we have a list of all of our partners.
This is kind of a follow-up to that, but you had listed all the cities that had been
Mhm.
declared or determined to be friendly, right, or safe. Can't remember how you determined it, but do you know what the process is? Like, is it like a city ordinance, or do you know how a city becomes that, has that status?
They pass ordinance and laws
Okay,
where, yeah, they have actual laws and ordinance on the books that are anti-discrimination.
okay.
Yeah. And so I chose 7 because this is based on sexual orientation and gender identity. I put the link at the bottom if people want to look at more because there are some municipalities that only cover one area and not the other. But yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. And I know that this is a really, really big topic. And this is a really brief overview because you could talk for hours on all the different part of this, even just picking one area, like the, you know, being admitted into the United States and the discrimination. And so I hope it at least kind of starts that conversation and looking at resources and looking at your businesses, your universities, your groups. Um, do you need to change anything about what being inclusive means for you or what safe means to you? And who are the people at the table? Um, so I think that's all really important.
Well, thank you. If there are no further questions, we can end a little bit early, but I
Yeah.
would like to remind you that the conference is taking a break, a lunch break now until 1 p.m. If you want to come back at 1 o'clock and join the main link that you were on earlier today for the opening and plenary session, you can do that, and we'll plan on seeing you at 1 o'clock. But I wanted to say thank you, Misha, very much for this very interesting presentation. I learned a lot, and it was a topic I did not know anything about. So I really appreciate your time and expertise and sharing it with us this morning.
Not a problem. And I will get the slides sent over and so that they can be sent out to anyone that wants them.
That's great. Thank you. Well, thank
Thank
you all
you.
for attending, and we will see you this afternoon.